Welcome to the More Than Fitness podcast.
Hello, friends, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Minisode number 32 on the More Than Fitness podcast. And we've got a great topic today. I know I say that for every Minisode, but I promise this one is going to be a little bit extra special. And the reason being is because I don't think it's talked about enough. And the topic today is going to be on foods to eat when cutting versus bulking. Now, I think the first question you need to ask yourself is, are you cutting or are you bulking? I think it's super important to make sure that for most of you listening, you need to pick one of these, right? You need to make sure that you pick, okay, I'm 100% committing to cutting and I'm 100% committing to bulking. Because whenever people try and do both at the same time, unless you are pretty much a beginner or you have a coach helping you out who knows how to kind of strategically do that and monitor your progress along the way, you're probably going to end up spinning your wheels if you try and recomp or if you try and build muscle and lose fat at the same time and you try and do it on your own. I think you would get much better results if you spent a period of time cutting and then you spent a period of time bulking or vice versa, right? That's just going to prevent you from spinning your wheels and you can actually get your mind focused on one direction for a certain period of time, like 6 to 12 to 18 weeks or something like that, as opposed to cutting for 2 weeks, then bulking for 2 weeks, then cutting for 2 weeks, and on. Because that's whenever you don't make any progress at all, and that's whenever you spin your wheels and you become very, very frustrated. So what I'm going to do is, actually I have a screenshot, and again, using pictures now with these videos. So what I'm going to do is, if you're wondering if you should cut or bulk or recomp, Andy Morgan, he's another coach. He's pretty well known in the industry and puts out great work. And he made this little chart and instead of explaining it all out to you, what I'm going to do is put these two pictures. Here we go. I'm going to do the fancy ding. And then I'm gonna have the two pictures pop up. Pause it, check that out, see kind of the category of trainee that you are, and then that'll give you the direction based off of your body fat percentage, your current body fat percentage, and your experience as a lifter, and what he recommends you should do. I 100% agree with these recommendations, or else I wouldn't be putting these pictures in the video. All right. And that's not exactly what I want to talk about today, but that's the first thing that you need to do before you go forward with the information I'm about to tell you. Figure out if you're going to cut or you're going to bulk, or if you're that special snowflake who needs to recomp. All right. So the main difference that I want to talk about with foods whenever you're cutting versus when you're bulking is going to come down to this fun little word that I'm probably going to mess up because it's difficult to say over and over again, but it's the palatability of foods, right? And the reason why I wanted to talk about this today was because I had a client who is, he's a bigger dude. He's eating legit. He's trying to gain muscle. He's trying to bulk. He's eating between like 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day. And he was talking about how it's hard to eat that much food. And I was like, yes, I'm well aware that's quite a bit of food to end up hitting every single day. But what I told him to do is to make sure that he pays attention to the palatability. And an example that I gave him was, so for example, when you're cutting, right? This isn't what I told him, but to make the comparison, what I said is, whenever you are cutting, you want to make sure. So let's use potatoes, for example, right? Whenever you're cutting, it's probably a good idea to eat a baked potato. And then you're going to use a little bit of salt, maybe a little bit of butter. And basically it's going to be fairly plain. The reason being is because you're going to eat that potato slower. So it's going to take you longer to eat that baked potato. And it's also not as palatable. Because it's not as creamy. There's not tons of butter. There's not tons of salt, making it easier to eat so that you can eat it if it has a lot of salt and butter and things like that, you eat it more quickly, right? And then that's going to result in you not being as satiated. So whenever you're cutting, eating a plain baked potato where you think, okay, this is kind of dry, it's not the greatest. Yes, that's true, but it's also going to get you fuller more quickly, and you're going to be more satiated by the time that you are done with it, resulting in making sure that you're not overeating, right? But on the flip side, for this client, you want to make that potato more palatable. And the way that you would do that, so think about a regular baked potato versus mashed potatoes with lots of butter, milk, salt, so making it really creamy. And think about how much potatoes you could eat and how quickly you could eat a large amount of mashed potatoes in a single meal compared to a plain baked potato that's not highly salted, that's not really buttery or creamy, right? So what I was saying is he needs to pay attention to how many calories he can eat per bite since he has so many to eat throughout an entire day. There's no reason that he needs to be eating tons of like salad, right? Or having just like chicken and rice and broccoli and having all these quote unquote clean foods, because eating 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day on quote unquote clean foods is just, it's not going to be the most fun thing for time's sake and also for your digestion as well. So the main point here is the palatability of the food, and the extreme of this version. So we have the cutting version of potatoes, right? This is my example. I'll give other examples in a second. But with potatoes on the cutting spectrum, you have a plain baked potato with minimal salt and minimal butter, right? In the middle, you're going to have something like mashed potatoes with butter and salt and make it really creamy. It's pretty easy to eat pretty quickly. Then on the other side, the far end of that spectrum of palatability is going to be like potato chips. So potato chips are basically engineered by food scientists to taste delicious and be able to eat a ton of them because they have oil on them. So they're fatty, they're salty, they're crunchy, and they're delicious, right? So you have those ends of the spectrum of palatability. And you can imagine why when you're cutting, you don't want to be eating potato chips because it's much more calories per bite than a regular baked potato, but they're also delicious to eat. So you can overeat on them more quickly. Other examples of this, these are what I wrote down for him. So you have low palatability foods like plain oatmeal. And I think, so I've talked about a few of these before in another Minisode if you guys have caught that, but I've got a few other examples that I want to go over today. But low palatability would be like plain oatmeal, right? If anybody's had plain oatmeal, it basically tastes like cardboard. Like before you add any of the sugar or sweeteners or peanut butter or whatever, right? It's not the best. But if we flip that on the other side, so if you're cutting something like plain oatmeal, obviously you don't have to have just plain oatmeal, but making it as plain as possible while still not hating yourself while you eat it is probably going to be a good idea. But flip that on the other side, whenever you're bulking and you're trying to get in a lot of calories quickly and throughout the entire day, that's whenever a sugary oatmeal cookie or an oatmeal-based cereal, you're gonna be able to eat more of it in fewer bites, right, than you would with the plain oatmeal. So it's got a higher palatability. The same thing would be unsalted peanuts. It's not going to be as delicious as peanut butter. You could eat a lot more peanut butter with salt in it than you could with unsalted peanuts. Another example would be dry chicken versus a fatty, juicy steak, even with butter on it or something, right? The steak is the option that you want to opt out for more whenever you're bulking and trying to add muscle and trying to get in more calories per bite. Another would be raw broccoli versus buttered and cooked broccoli, even dipped in cheese, right? So these examples, and then the last one is going to be raw fruit versus dry fruit. Think about dried fruit like that comes in the bags, like the dehydrated fruit that basically tastes like candy. You can eat tons of it. So which this means it makes it ideal for whenever you're bulking. So these are going to be some examples of foods to eat whenever you're cutting versus bulking. And just as a quick recap of the principles that you're looking for whenever you're cutting versus bulking, as far as what types of foods you should eat. So whenever you're cutting, you want to make sure, again, because hunger is going to be the main thing there. You're eating fewer calories, so you want to make sure that you're not starving yourself. So if let's say you're eating 1,800 calories per day, you want to make sure that all 1,800 of those calories really count. You're not just eating like one fast food meal per day and obviously this is an extreme example, but you know how easy it would be to get 1,800 calories from McDonald's or something like that in one meal. So what makes up those calories whenever you're cutting, especially, you're going to have to pay more attention to. But also the same thing goes whenever you're bulking and it's hard for you to eat 3,000, 4,000 calories per day, right? There's no reason why you shouldn't be strategic about the calories that make up that goal as well. So whenever you're cutting, the main principles you want to look for would be high protein. So protein is the most satiating macronutrient. So protein, carbs, fats. Protein is the most satiating. It's also going to allow you to retain as much muscle mass as possible whenever you're dieting down. So high protein, I would say about a gram per pound for most people, up to a 1.2 grams per pound is going to be a good limit for most of you. Other than protein, high fiber. Fiber, of course, as many of you guys know, is going to be good for delaying gastric emptying, helps with gastric distension, so it just makes you feel fuller in general. And then also the foods that are high fiber foods, think about it, fruits and vegetables. This is why fruits and vegetables are such good choices whenever you're dieting, because you can eat a high amount of them. So it's a high volume food. You can eat tons of them for very few calories. So having high fiber, for the most part, I think the recommendations are like, I think 12 or 14 grams per 1,000 calories. So if you're eating 2,000 calories today, let's say it would be about 25 grams per day. I know that the actual recommendations are a little bit higher than that, but as far as a minimum goes, I would go for 12 to 14 grams per 1,000 calories. Whenever you're cutting, definitely go for the higher end on this amount. Okay, the next principle is going to be, you want to make sure your foods are not as tasty whenever you're cutting, because that makes sure that you eat them slower. It also, you're going to be satiated more quickly, and you're not going to feel hungry after you get done with your meal. And that's the thing, that's the problem, that it's kind of this weird paradox whenever people are dieting. They want to make their foods taste as tasty as possible. And I'm guilty of this too, but it actually kind of backfires and you don't feel as full, and you're actually you're hungrier more quickly than you would be if the food was less tasty. Which brings me to the next principle, which is eat slower. And this is something I've talked about multiple times. But if you make the food high protein, high fiber, and not as tasty, this is kind of going to happen by default, because you think about eating a really juicy steak compared to dry chicken with no seasoning on it. That dried chicken is going to you're going to be chewing it way longer than you would that juicy piece of steak, right? And then the last one is to increase the viscosity of the food. So a good example of this would be like smoothies. Whenever you're cutting, it's a good idea to use things like yogurt or lots of ice, basically just anything that's going to thicken the smoothie. So think about a really thick yogurt fruit smoothie compared to just drinking like orange juice. Right? The orange juice is going to have very low viscosity. So the orange juice would be ideal whenever you're bulking, but whenever you're cutting, you want to make sure that the milkshake is as thick as possible. So you would use a lot more ice, or you would use more yogurt. And that, again, that's going to increase the satiety signals, and it's going to reduce your chewing rate. So you're just going to eat slower by default. And then basically, the bulking side of things is going to be the opposite of that. So you're going to look at, I'm not saying you should eat low protein, but moderate protein is a good idea. Moderate fiber. Again, don't just pick dog shit foods all day. You want to make the foods tastier. And then by default, you're probably going to eat a little bit faster, and then decreasing the viscosity. So again, this is like the unsalted peanuts compared to peanut butter, and then the milkshake of making a fruit smoothie with tons of ice and making it really thick compared to just like orange juice or grape juice or something like that. And that should be just about it. Yeah, so pay attention to the palatability of the foods and whenever you're cutting versus bulking. And again, you can actually taper this off as you get deeper and deeper into your cut. Like if you're going from bulking to cutting, you don't want to just immediately lay all your cards on the table and go immediately from really tasty foods to really bland foods. But over time, as you cut, as you get deeper and deeper into your diet, you can make the foods a little bit more bland, and follow those principles that I suggested. So higher protein, higher fiber, eating slower, et cetera, et cetera. And I hope that helps you guys, whether you count calories or not. I think it's a good idea to think about whenever you are making your food choices when cutting versus bulking. All right. And I think that's it for Minisode number 32 on the More Than Fitness podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening and for watching. See ya.